This is the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show on June 18th, 2020. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles. My name is Andy Z, and I'm the host of the RNL show. First, on behalf of the whole crew of the RNL show, we want to welcome all of our first-time viewers, all of you who are stepping out into the streets of this country and around the world for what could be the most meaningful thing you can do with your life, which is standing up against injustice. Putting your body and soul up against all the brutality and degradation, demonization, and outrageous horrors that people face. People like yourself and people here and around the world whose lives, where they live, what language they speak, their cultures are vastly different than your own, but whose desire to live as full human beings is every bit as important and valuable as your own is. We begin today with my commentary, which will be followed by a short film on the Tulsa massacre of 1921, 99 years ago. And then we're going to get into how, in this struggle against police murder and brutality against black people, the struggle that's going on in the streets of this country and around the world today, we build unity between black and brown people and not allow the system to divide our people up, which will begin with a moving film excerpt from Bob Avakian on why do people come here from all over the world. And then our last segment will be on the struggle against the fascist Trump-Pence regime and refuse fascism's call for actions of the people to stand up and stay in the streets until this regime is driven from power. So now to our commentary for this week. And again, this is especially directed at all of the new people who are coming to our show for the first time, but also to every person all around the world who has been inspired by this welcome rising. There is a desire and the broad feeling in the streets that this time, the struggle must be different. People of all nationalities, all races, all genders are standing together, determined to end white supremacy and police brutality that threaten every youth of color, that haunts their parents, that poisons the whole society and rightly is reaching deep into the hearts and the minds of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of white youth who are standing shoulder to shoulder with youth of color in the streets. And this is a significant and important thing. But you must not be turned away or turn away, either by the promises for a few changes to the existing setup or by repression. Do not be turned away or turn away from your desire for a life, for a world where white supremacy is no more, where police brutality, murder, and mass incarceration are no more, where black, brown, Native American people who are systematically denied the same rights and means to live and flourish is also no more. There is a way out of the madness. It is possible to struggle for a radically new world where people could go to work on overcoming all the brutality and inequalities, the vicious exploitation and oppression, the wars, the devastation of our very planet, where all of this really is no more. But that will take nothing less than an actual revolution. And that is what this show is all about. That is what we work hard every week to bring you in every episode. Revolution is not just a sentiment, a good feeling of standing up. It is not a jazzier way to do the same thing that we've been doing all along. A real revolution means overthrowing the system that is the cause of all the problems that plague humanity. It means dismantling all those corporations and government institutions that are how this system, this capitalist imperialist system, actually works. And it means that there's a time that can come, and through the work that we do, when millions of people have become convinced that this is the way forward, who are willing to put it all on the line, that then we can meet and defeat all the forces of repression that enforce this system. Whoa, that's serious. That's why you have to really know what the cause of the problems that humanity faces is, and how it really could be possible to overthrow the system that causes all these problems, and what a new society is that could be built from the ground up on this ground should really be. But to do that, you need science and you need leadership. The good news is that we have both in Bob Avakian, BA. Science and leadership. Two words much misunderstood and much maligned. The starkest case in point of that is captured in two altogether different and quite ugly words: Donald and Trump. Science is a method and approach for understanding the world, for knowing reality, for knowing what's real. It is a way to investigate and gather evidence, analyzing it, and on that basis finding the ways to change it, to overcome those aspects of the real world that stand as obstacles to humanity being free. This is what B.A. Bob Avakian has done. He's developed the science of communism in a qualitative way, such that what he has done is called the new communism. And that's what we strive to apply here at the RNL show, much the same way a good doctor applies the work of a good medical scientist. And at the RNL show, we bring you BA straight up every week. Over the past few episodes, we have played an important message to the movement against police murder and the oppression of black people that is in the streets today. This is a piece from Bob Avakian, a message to the movement called Nothing Less. In this message, BA poses two big issues that are posed by the struggle in the streets.
An end to institutionalized racism and murder by police. Nothing less. An end to any way people anywhere are used, abused, and brutalized. Nothing less. We need a world without white supremacy and male supremacy. A world where no one is regarded as alien. A world without war, where people from all over the globe, with a beautiful flowering of diversity, act together for the common good and are truly caretakers of the earth. This is not just a dream. The possibility for this is being powerfully demonstrated in this uprising of the people, of all different races and genders, from all parts of the world, refusing to remain silent or stay passive while all this oppression and brutality goes on. To make all this real, we need revolution, nothing less.
So that was Bob Avakian. Two things all of us need to do to make this real. Whether you are brand new to the struggle and thinking about revolution for the first time, or you've dreamed about revolution for years but thought it wasn't possible, or you want to be part of a sort of revolution and vote for Bernie and clean up a few of the rough edges of this capitalist white supremacist system by casting a vote while leaving the murderous system intact, or even if you've been working for revolution for many decades, there's two things that we all need to do right now. First is to get into Bob Avakian and what his work. Most important, get your hands on basics from the talks and writings of Bob Avakian. This is the handbook for revolution. Get into the strategy for revolution, which is in this pamphlet, how we can win, how we can really make revolution. And there's a film that expands on this, why we need an actual revolution and how we could really make revolution. And I talked about the society that comes after the revolution. That's concentrated in this, The Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America, authored by Bob Avakian. And go to revcom.us every day where you can find all this work online, but also you find on Revcom important articles that explain the situation, that bring out the dark forces that are behind this, and you find the work of Bob Avakian. And also go to the Revcom's YouTube channel, which hopefully you're watching right now, is watching this video. Okay, and spread the news of this show. Get it to everybody, and look at all the other videos we put up here, the segments, and especially the videos featuring Bob Avakian. But there's a second thing we all need to do. Connect up with the movement for an actual revolution and be out in the streets bringing revolution. A key part of the strategy for revolution is fight the power and transform the people for revolution, which on the simple means, first, that people must fight the powers that be, is how the song puts it. And that at the same time, and as a decisive part of waging that struggle, is changing the thinking of people, including your own, to come to see why and how revolution is the solution. Now, in bringing this commentary to a conclusion, I want to bring these two things that we all need to do to life by directing your attention to an important new article on revcom.us titled Racial Oppression Can Be Ended, but Not Under This System. BA begins by posing this question: why is this terror and murder necessary for this system in order to ensure its order and ongoing functioning? He then poses a basic answer. The answer is that from the beginning of this country, white supremacy has been poured into the foundation and built into the institutions and the ongoing functioning of this system. From there, the article goes on into a highly understandable history of the oppression of black people and white supremacy, and how it is tightly stitched into the way everything that people need to live is produced under capitalism that concentrates such tremendous inequality and oppression, and how its government functions and enforces that very same oppression and exploitation. This is a must-read to not get played by all those who offer honeyed words of moving the pieces of this system around for a few reforms, while the beast continues to ravage the people. Towards the end of this important article on how racial oppression can be ended, he says this: fighting back against oppression and wrenching concessions from the powers that be is very important in enabling masses of people to feel their own strength in standing up and standing together in opposing oppression, and drawing people from all parts of society to join in this struggle rather than feeling isolated, beaten down, and helpless. And it is important in contributing to the ability of the masses of people to gain the understanding and to build up the organization necessary for the final all-out struggle to bring down the whole oppressive system. But that is just the point. As important as these mass struggles are, if they are not built toward and do not finally get to the point of taking on the whole system with the aim of bringing it down and bringing something much better into being, then, as I have emphasized before, even where concessions are won, quote, so long as the system remains in power, there will be powerful forces who will move to attack and undermine and seek to reverse even these partial gains, end quote. And people will remain oppressed and once more weighed down with a feeling of demoralization as they are once again divided and pitted against each other. And that brings me to the topics of our show today. Because later in this show, we're going to hear from Bob Avakian on how different sections of the people are pitted against each other, speaking specifically to the black-brown divide, to how people who are oppressed by this system are set against each other. And bringing this to life, we're going to show some extremely moving film of testimony on the streets of Los Angeles from a protest and speak out that was called by the Revcoms on Friday, June 12th in Los Angeles. And included with this is a short video from a detention center where ICE prisoners, people in a detention camp, in a concentration camp, are going on a hunger strike to stand together with the struggle for black lives that's going on in the streets. But first, we begin with a special film of one installment of the American Crime series on revcom.us. This series was inspired by the first of three things that Bob Avakian said had to happen in order for there to be real and lasting change for the better. He said people have to fully confront the actual history of this country and its role in the world up to today and the terrible consequences of this. Each installment of the Revcon series focuses on one of the 100 worst crimes committed by the U.S. rulers, one out of the countless bloody crimes they've carried out against people all around the world as well as here, from the founding of the United States down to the present day. Today, we're presenting a special film version of the American Crime series, number 12.
Okay, here's a pop quiz. What was the site of the biggest race riot in the history of this country?
Where the wind comes sweeping down the plain.
That's right, the great state of Oklahoma, home of lovable farmers and ranchers who just need to learn how to be friends and share all those wide open spaces. In the decades following the Civil War, Oklahoma was the destination for both white settlers and former slaves looking to build a new life. It was also the final destination of the Trail of Tears, the forced march of the southeastern Native American tribes, but that's another American crime story. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, the very first law they passed legalized and enforced racial segregation. After all, they had to make it a real American state. Tulsa, then, was a sleepy town of 10,000. But with the discovery of oil 3 years later, the population grew to over 100,000 in just 1 decade. Among those were thousands of black people looking for a better life and hoping to escape the worst of Jim Crow Mississippi, Georgia, and other states of the Old South. In 1921, Tulsa was strictly segregated. Black people could work in town, but all black residents were required to live and shop in the Greenwood district of northern Tulsa. Greenwood's segregated economy, self-contained and self-sufficient, was so successful that it became known nationally as the Black Wall Street. Black-owned grocery stores, banks, libraries, hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, and more lined Greenwood Avenue. But here's what happened on May 30th, 1921. Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old black shoe shiner working downtown, enters the elevator of the only building with a restroom that blacks can use in the area. Sarah Page, a white 17-year-old, is the elevator operator. When the door closes, Page cries out, and Rowland, who may have just tripped and stepped on her foot, runs off, knowing what can happen. Sure enough, he's alleged, without evidence, to have assaulted Page. He's arrested the next morning and held in a jail cell above City Hall. Then the headlines hit. The Tulsa Tribune declares "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator," and headlines an editorial, quote, "To lynch Negro tonight," end quote. Within an hour, a lynch mob in the hundreds descends on the courthouse. Word spreads throughout Greenwood that whites are storming the courthouse, and Rowland is in danger. At 9 p.m., a group of 25 armed black men, some World War I veterans, drive to the courthouse determined to stop the lynching. The local authorities refuse their offer to help, and they leave. But the heavily armed white mob is incensed. When a group of 75 black men return to the courthouse and are again turned away, a white man approaches an armed black Army veteran and demands he turn over his gun. A fight breaks out, and a gun goes off. Historian and author Scott Ellsworth wrote, "While the first shot fired at the courthouse may have been unintentional, those that followed were not. Almost immediately, members of the white mob, and possibly some law enforcement officers, opened fire on the African American men, who returned volleys of their own. The initial gunplay lasted only a few seconds, but when it was over, as many as a dozen men, both black and white, lay dead or wounded. Outnumbered more than 20 to 1, the black men began a retreating fight toward the African American district, with armed whites in close pursuit. They tried to kill all the black folks they could see," a survivor, George Monroe, recalled later. As many as 500 white men and boys are immediately sworn in as, quote, "special deputies," end quote, and told to, quote, "get a gun and get a nigger," end quote. Deputies pass out weapons from a sporting goods store across the street. White rioters begin firing on blacks and setting fire to black-owned homes and businesses late into the night. Then as dawn approaches, literally thousands of armed whites, some estimated as many as 10,000, gathered in 3 locations on the edges of Greenwood. A siren sounds at daybreak, and the mobs of white terrorists launch their invasion. These armed white mobs include over 150 Tulsa police. They set about systematically killing, looting, and burning the entire district of Greenwood, block by block. Armed whites break into black homes and businesses and force the people outside, where they are led away at gunpoint to internment centers set up by the authorities. Anyone who resists is shot. If guns are found inside, the occupant is shot. Homes and businesses are looted, then set on fire with torches and oil-soaked rags. House by house, block by block, Greenwood is demolished. Even airplanes are used to shoot black people from the air and drop kerosene bombs on buildings, setting them ablaze. Tremendously outnumbered, black Tulsans fight back. Riflemen take positions atop the belfry of a newly built church to try and halt the white invasion. But the church is burned to the ground. Deputized police and the National Guard units arrest 6,000 Greenwood residents. Black Tulsans don't go down without a fight, but they're outgunned and outnumbered. Survivors recounted black bodies loaded on trains and dumped off bridges into the Arkansas River, and, most frequently, tossed into mass graves. By noon on June 1st, these white mobs had murdered more than 300 black Tulsa residents. They had turned 40 square blocks of Greenwood into a scorched wasteland, including 1,256 homes destroyed, along with virtually every other structure, churches, schools, businesses, even a hospital and library. More than 10,000 residents were left homeless. Thousands of black Tulsans spent the winter living in tents, many left for good, having had enough of Tulsa, Oklahoma. A grand jury investigation organized by Oklahoma's governor in the days after the massacre referred to the events in Tulsa as a, quote, Negro uprising, end quote, concluding, quote, the assembly was quiet until the arrival of armed Negroes, which precipitated and was the direct cause of the entire affair, end quote. But that ain't all, folks. The Tulsa race riot was erased from the state and country's history for 76 years. It wasn't until 1997 that a commission was established in Oklahoma to study the riot. And what did they find? Quote, not one of these criminal acts was then or ever has been prosecuted or punished by government at any level, municipal, county, state, or federal.
So that was case number 12 from the American Crime Series, the 1921 Tulsa Massacre and the Destruction of Black Wall Street. We were very fortunate that film of that segment from the American Crime Series was made by David Zeiger, who's a film director who has done many films, documentaries, but one in particular I want to draw your attention to is called Sir, No Sir. You can find it, I believe, online. And David has contributed before to the Revolution Nothing Less show. So we want to thank David for doing that. Now, one of the reasons we're showing the Tulsa Massacre segment is, well, first off, it was the 99th anniversary of it on May 31st. But the big impetus behind this is this weekend is also a celebration of Juneteenth that has been taken up by the Black Lives Matter movement for 3 days of protests on the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st. And also Refuse Fascism as part of this is called for a protest on the 20th, which I'll talk about later. But the reason they've done that protest and what made it so important to bring forth this episode on Tulsa is that fascist pig in the White House, Donald Trump, decided that how he would speak on race would be to go to Tulsa on Juneteenth. And Juneteenth, for those who don't know, is June 19th, which is the day that the Emancipation Proclamation was read in Texas after the Civil War, and there was great celebration. This has become, particularly in recent years, but also for many years, a day in which people celebrate the emancipation of black people from slavery. And so the outrage that this white supremacist who called for the military to crush this protest, who ordered tear gas and Black Hawk helicopters to drive peaceful protesters from Lafayette Park so he could stand for a Photoshop with a photo opportunity in front of St. John's Church with his Bible there, signaling to all these Christian fascists who are part of his social base that he's standing with them and with the police and against black people. This was really an outrage too far, and it caused a tremendous amount of struggle, which we're not going to take the time to analyze right now. But we thought it very appropriate that we bring this history to light of the Tulsa Massacre of 1920, when now Trump actually backed off showing up on the 19th and instead is going to come and speak in Tulsa on the 20th, which is why, as I will mention later on and get into a brief segment on Refuse Fascism and the fight against the regime, on the 20th, during his speech, will be protesting there and around the country. So next up, we have a segment from the film Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, and What It's All About, a film of a talk by Bob Avakian made in 2003. And we're going to show a film clip that is titled and tells the story in an extremely artful way that's expressed in its title, Why Do People Come Here from All Over the World? And this will provide a context for and an introduction to the following segment, which will feature actual testimony from people on the streets of Los Angeles, as well as from an ICE detention center, where, as I said in the introduction to the show, detainees are going on a hunger strike to support the struggle in the streets for Black Lives Matter.
Now I can just hear these reactionary fools saying, well, Bob, answer this. If this country is so terrible, why do people come here from all over the world? Why are so many people trying to get in, not to get out? Maybe we can imagine someone like Vice President Dick Cheney, that crooked-mouthed monster and worldwide mass murderer. Maybe we can imagine him saying something like this. Yes, Bob, why is that? Why? I'll tell you why. Because you have fucked up the rest of the world even worse than what you have done in this country. You have made it impossible for many people to live in their own countries as part of gaining your riches and power. To understand how this system works and how it controls and shapes people's lives, let's look at how people from Mexico and black people end up living alongside each other in somewhere like Watts in Los Angeles or New Jersey or New York City today. It's 1780 or 1800, and someone is walking through their home village in Africa. Maybe they're taking care of a few cattle. Maybe they're tending a few crops. Maybe they're just out for a walk and enjoying the sunny day in the summer. Whatever, all of a sudden they're grabbed and a rope is thrown around them. They're dragged away, never again to see their village or their loved ones. They're transported to a seacoast where they're sold to slave traders, thrown in the hold of a ship under the most horrific and unimaginable conditions, piled together. If you've ever seen drawings, diagrams of slave ships, people packed together, cargo as they were called, rats crawling over you day and night, slop at most to eat, never even allowed up on deck to even get any fresh air. If bad conditions arose on the seas, storms developed, the slave ship owners would go among the cargo, the human beings, and decide which one should be thrown overboard so they could save the rest of the cargo so they could make a profit. And through all that horror, you're finally brought to the Americas. Have everything stripped away from you, even your identity. Forced to slave, the people forced to slave away for generations. As the old saying goes, from can't see in the morning till can't see at night. After all the unbelievable horror of what I just described on the slave ship, the Middle Passage, for millions, where millions and perhaps tens of millions died, and those who survived were subjected to these unbelievable conditions of slavery. After generations and centuries of that, finally comes the Civil War. You're promised an end to oppression. You're promised you'll get land and a means for farming the land, 40 acres and a mule. But the promise is broken. After a few years of reconstruction in which a few people got some rights and a little bit of land and property, people were stripped of all that and subjected to all the kind of terror and lynching that I've talked about here. This goes on also for generations. The KKK and the rest of it, forcing you to remain on the plantations, terrorizing you into working for the man, being cheated even when you do work. Finally, after World War II, you're driven off the land. You seek a better life. You go to the city or you go to the north. And what do you face? Once again, betrayal. You are segregated once again, terrorized now by the police. You end up in a housing project that's being allowed and deliberately constructed to rot away. In ancient Mexico, in the beginning of the 1500s, the Spanish conquistadores arrive in what they call the New World. The Spanish conquerors destroy the old ways of life and work people to death in the mines and on plantations called haciendas. This old way of life was not free of exploitation and oppression and plunder, but the Spanish did not come to liberate the people or to do away with exploitation, oppression, and plunder. They came to institute their own, an even worse and far more vicious form of exploitation and plunder, literally working people to death in the mines and on the haciendas, destroying their culture, taking away everything from them. About 150 years ago, after Mexico became independent from Spain, the U.S. waged war on Mexico and stole a large part of its territory. One of the main reasons for this is that the slave owners in the southern U.S. needed more land. The U.S. replaced Spain and other European colonial powers as the force dominating and plundering Mexico. The Mexican Revolution in the early part of the 1900s promised land to the peasants, but there was never a fundamental change, and the masses of people were still trapped in a situation of being exploited as poor peasant farmers while their country is plundered by the U.S. Throughout the 20th century, and even more so in recent years, the ever greater domination of farming in Mexico by big American agricultural companies has ruined the livelihood of millions of more peasant farmers in Mexico, who were already living in poor and desperate conditions, but were driven further into such desperate conditions, so much so that they could no longer survive by farming. The Mexican government goes into more and more debt to big banks and financial institutions in the rich countries, especially the U.S. And then, at the insistence of the U.S., it cuts off aid to the peasants who are still trying to survive by farming in Mexico. In effect, the government forces them to grow crops that get sold internationally on what is called the world market, which is controlled by the rich countries and their financial institutions. But the Mexican peasants cannot compete in this world market. They cannot make a living. They can barely survive, if they can survive at all, by farming. Writing in our party's newspaper, The Revolutionary Worker, in 1994, shortly after an uprising in Chiapas in the southern part of Mexico, Michael Slate gave a sharp example of this. He wrote about what has happened to Mexican agriculture over the past 30 years. Now, agri means having to do with the land, so agriculture is a way of life based on the land. Slate described how over the last 30 years, Mexican agriculture has been greatly damaged by even more deeply mixed in with and dependent on the world market. Peasant farmers growing things not for their own needs and not necessarily for what is needed in Mexico itself, but what can be sold to big buyers all over the world. Once again, a world market dominated by companies controlling billions of dollars. Deeply in debt and under pressure from the World Bank, which itself is dominated by the U.S., the Mexican government promoted crops that could be sold on the world market in order to try to pay off this debt that it was sinking deeper and deeper into. Land and resources were shifted away from basic food production, and the results have been a disaster for the peasants. In Chiapas, for example, most peasants used to grow corn and beans, but over the years, many switched to growing coffee for export. When the price of coffee fell on the world market in 1990, thousands of Mexican peasants were ruined. And in a recent issue of our newspaper, the RW, there's another article detailing more fully how imperialist domination from the U.S. through things like NAFTA and other ways have further ruined the peasants in Mexico. Another thing mentioned in that article is the maquiladoras in Mexico, just inside the border with the U.S. These are factories that are set up by U.S. companies. They move away from the U.S. and put them just over the border in Mexico. And that line there, that border, is the difference between wages that are 10 times higher on the U.S. side and 10 times lower on the Mexico side. And who works in these maquiladoras? People who can no longer live in the interior, in the countryside, on the farmlands of Mexico, and especially many women who are not only brutally exploited, but also sexually harassed on the job, and many have been murdered coming to and from the job in these border areas. But even that's not enough. Now many of the maquiladoras are being closed down on the border, while some new ones are being built further in the interior of Mexico in order to take advantage of people who are impoverished there. And still others are being moved to other places, in Asia and elsewhere, where people can be worked for even lower wages because they're even more desperate. So through all this, you find yourself having to leave your home and your homeland in Mexico to go to El Norte, the USA, where you face discrimination and exploitation, living in fear every day of the immigration police, La Migra, if you don't have the necessary papers. You too end up in Watts, or in New York City or New Jersey or other cities in the U.S. In the early 80s, there was a movie starring Jack Nicholson and Elpidia Carrillo called The Border, which dramatically showed the kinds of hardships that drive people and the promises and illusions that call them to cross the border from Mexico into the U.S. And it showed the hardships they suffer once they come to the U.S., the ways in which they are treated as aliens, and how they are exploited and brutalized in so many ways. The following lines from the theme song of that movie give a powerful sense of what this means. The bitter disappointment that is found in the so-called promised land of the USA, and the many ways in which people are still hemmed in by the visible and invisible borderline. Now my voice is hoarse, but I'm going to give this a try. There's a land, so I've been told, every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline. And when it's time to take your turn, here's a lesson you must learn. You will lose more than you'll ever hope to find. And when you reach the broken promised land, every dream slips through your hand, and you'll know it's too late to change your mind, 'cause you paid the price to come this far, just to wind up where you are, and you still just across the borderline. For oppressed people who have been through all this, what sense does it make to fight over the crumbs the oppressors leave us? Or to fight for control of things we can never really control under this system, including the very neighborhoods we live in, the neighborhoods they have forced us into while they run these neighborhoods down? What sense does it make to fight each other like that, when we are part of the same class of exploited and oppressed people who can rise up together to put an end to all this?
That was Bob Avakian on Why Do People Come Here from All Over the World? And since the movement taking to the streets for Black Lives burst forth in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, it seems that particularly in Chicago, there developed a section of people in the Latino community who oppose this movement for Black Lives. And the Revcoms recognized that this was an opportunity to build unity. And so they joined with other people and groups to call for a protest in Los Angeles on June 12th. 300 people came together to say Black and Brown united against the system in a march that was led by the Revcoms through downtown Los Angeles and then went to the Central American neighborhood that is around the park, MacArthur Park. So all different nationalities marched and chanted together, and they stopped at the Ramparts police station with its notorious history of police brutality and corruption. It's just an incredible, awful fucking history that you can go look up on the internet. After marching there, they went to the center of the area where there is vendors out almost every day, and it's kind of like a little bit of a agora, a town square. It's a bit of a street festival there. And the Revcoms and the marchers took over an intersection for over an hour and held a speak out that really changed something as the people listened to each other. So that's what we're going to show you first, and it's going to run right into a video that we had an opportunity to see yesterday. It's a really short video, 4 minutes, that I found extremely important and extremely moving, that was made on June 8th of detainees at the Mesa Verde Detention Center. This is an ICE detention center, who have gone on a hunger strike in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And this video was put out by the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. I think it's really worth watching.
Coming out here, being out in the streets for how many days in a row, not just here in LA but all over the world, okay? Yeah. You've changed something. You're a part of that.
The reason why we're out here and doing this is because we're looking at not just what was going on here in LA, but also in Chicago, where people were also rising up. But then when they went into a neighborhood that is more Latinos, more Puerto Ricans, all of a sudden you had Latinos and Black people fighting each other.
But look, people gotta get challenged. People gotta understand, since the day that we're born, what are we told? That as a brown person, you gotta look at a Black person, and that's the enemy. You come to this country, people from Central America, people from Mexico, that come to this country to try to bring a better life to their family. And they're told that Black people are lazy. They're told that Black people are criminals. They're told that they're thugs. And that those are the people that are our enemy. And if you're Black, you're told that those people that are coming from across the border are taking your jobs. That's what we're told. And we're pitted against each other. And that serves their fucking system, to keep us in the situation that we're in, instead of coming together and recognizing who our true enemy is. Not the people across the street from us, not the people that look like me and you, but the system. Black and brown, black and brown, black and brown, black and brown.
The police do not treat people fair. In fact, the last year of law school, I made it all the way right. I studied, I worked hard, I worked my ass off. I went to USC Law. The last year of law school, the cops followed my dad home. They followed him and arrested him in my driveway. For what? For having a suspended license. A suspended license, that's not a reason to arrest anyone once they're already home sitting safely in your driveway. So my family called me, the law student, and said, get here now. I ran from USC, from an awards banquet where I was receiving an award, to go bail my dad out of jail. And I spent all my loan money on that. And I had to work 2 jobs to get through law school and get to where I am now, and I did it. But I cried. It's not about me. What I have experienced, I've experienced waking up, the police raided my house. I woke up with a gun in my face. You don't know the fear, the smell of danger when you know your life is in danger. You put your hands up. I was in my pajamas. The police made us walk outside with no shoes on. All the neighbors could see us while they raided our house for no reason. This is what I experienced myself as just a small, privileged little brown girl growing up in LA. I know that I am privileged, but I want to say that this, what I've experienced, as much as it's traumatized me, is not one drop in the ocean to what the Black community has suffered for the last 200 years. Don't take your foot off the gas. Don't be complacent with what little things they're trying to give us to do. March every day. Give what you can. Give your time. Give your energy. When you see something, you say something. We cannot let up. We're all in this together.
Black and brown, united, this system.
For me, it's about uniting black and brown. From the hood, from the neighborhood, Crips, Bloods, essays, everybody uniting, understanding that our common enemy is those who are in power and rich. Those are our common enemies, the ones that want to see us use the police to suppress us. I think it's time that we unite.
And what should the people at the bottom be doing?
We should be doing what we're doing right now, all of us united, fighting against the power, you know?
Chinga tu frontera!
Chinga tu frontera!
When I was in prison, they always tried to get black and brown to fight one another. We would be on the yard. One of my friends, who ended up being my friends, we didn't start off being friends. But this guy named Al, me and Al was on the yard. He was amongst the Latino prisoners. I was amongst the black prisoners. And here we are out there trying to kill one another. He had shit and I had shit. And we both ended up in solitary confinement. And where another brother, a Chicano revolutionary, introduced us, he was asking, what the fuck are y'all doing out here fighting like one another? And he introduced us, and we started to talk, me and Al, with each other, and we started to find out that we had so fucking much in common. And once we started to see that, we started to come together to fight the real enemy. So I started to understand that, the United States has always considered and treated Central America as its backyard, as its private property. That it get to use people and to use the people in those countries as his wishes to do, to use them in order to be able to suck as much wealth as they can out of the people and out of the resources of those countries throughout Central America. They destroyed the economy. Guatemala, where the U.S. had destroyed the economy, they dumped corn and dumped rice there, so the farmers couldn't compete and couldn't make a living. And they come into the cities where there's no job and there's no livelihood, but there's a border here that they can come across, and if they're lucky, they can make us 10 times as much in order to make a living as they can by staying there, because the U.S. has fucked up their country more than it's fucked up shit like here. And people get desperate. And then you see people going through the deserts, them and their little children, coming to El Norte just to try to make a better life for themselves. And when they get here, they're treated like criminals, like animals, put in detention centers along the border. You see little kids in the detention centers there in the border. I seen pictures of little 2-year-olds that they be bringing before a judge down there at the border. What kind of goddamn shit is this? What kind of system is this here? A system that needs to be, that cries out to be overthrown at the soonest possible time. And we got more in common than all this shit that they use to try to keep us divided and pitted, and so they can play us off against one another. I learned that I first began to learn that on the prison yard, but I learned it even more so when I started to get hooked up with this person, with this leader, with Bob Avakian, and started to get a scientific understanding about what it is going to take in order to make revolution, to get rid of this system.
African Americans have been used in the blood and mortar and the foundations of this country since the beginning. And something that's really easy to disregard is that it could have been anybody else taken from their land used for the foundation of this country, but it was black people that were taken. And for centuries, 4 centuries, they have borne the brutality and pain of our communities when it could have been anybody else. But history is something that we can't take back. And so now is the perfect time for all of us to come together and to erase these lines that have been drawn between us.
I am a Hispanic gay man. Since I was little, I remember kind of learning that white people you'd get further if you were white, right? That's kind of just how things have always been and how I thought it always would be. And so I kind of, from a really young age, made sure not to let myself get too dark during the summers, or when I started growing facial hair, to shave it off so I wouldn't look too Hispanic or too threatening. And that was something I put on myself because I learned it from society. And I think we need to make it, and I guess that's why I'm here, because I want to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore for anyone else out there. No one should have to hide who they are and make themselves look a certain way because they think that's how they're supposed to look.
It just looks beautiful, man. This is what LA's supposed to look like every day, not just for one day, every day. You know, I just wanted to come out here and just share my story. You know, I live in South Central. I stay on the home of the '92 riots. You know, but it just amazes me. Like every day I come out here. I've been out here for the past 2 weeks marching in. This, man, we got to keep it going. And it's, fuck the police.
We have to struggle together with each other and against this system, because the solution is not just mine or yours, it's about what does humanity need, okay? What does humanity need for this to end? For us to live in a world where there is no more murder by police, where there is no more white supremacy, no more male supremacy, where no one is alien, where there's no more wars, and where people work together all over the planet to serve each other and the planet, to take care of it instead of destroy it. As a revolutionary, as a follower of Bob Avakian, we're saying it's going to take revolution, nothing less, than to overthrow this system. We have a worked out strategy that Bob Avakian has developed, a constitution to replace it, where we would train our security forces to sooner die themselves and take a bullet than to ever murder one of the people that you're supposed to protect and serve. Woo!
We are speaking from the Mesa Verde detention facility in Bakersfield, California. We stand with the Black Lives Movement and against the system that took the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and so many black people. We are speaking out against the disregard of human lives. We are speaking out against the racist, criminal, and justice system. We have suffered racial profiling and discrimination in the United States. Almost all of us have suffered through the criminal system.
We want to bring awareness to the people who are not just protesting out there in the streets, but also in here. We want to give a voice to protesters who are immigrants. We believe there are many out there who want to stand up against this country's racism, but are scared if a cop stops them, they will be turned to immigration officials. We stand with them. Some of us in ICE detention are protesting this racist system by going on a hunger strike. Some of us are protesting in other ways.
We stand united in our protest and fight for change. We want to end racism and racist police. We want the police to stop murdering black people. We want the police to stop arresting and accusing people of color. We want the police to stop caging and deporting immigrants. We want the black and brown people to be free. We here at Mesa Verde want to be safe and free. We want the Attorney General to investigate the situation inside our detention centers during the pandemic that led to the recent death of our friend Mr. An and also Carlos Mejia. We will continue our protest until these demands are met. Thank you. Power to the people. We are human beings and we have a voice. Thank you very much. Time, power to the people.
Okay, so that was some moving testimony from the protest in Los Angeles. You heard that testimony from people who have great desire to overcome this divide between black and brown people, and among the Latinos to recognize the role that black people have played and been forced to endure in this country. And when you think also of that last video of the detainees, the ICE detainees who are going on a hunger strike to stand up for other people who they see correctly as their brothers, that should tell you about what kind of unity is possible and necessary if we're going to bring this monster of a system down. And it also brings you back to the Trump-Pence regime, who has set up these detention centers on a whole other level than they existed before, including virtual concentration camps at the border. And the struggle to remove this regime is at a very critical point right now. The Trump-Pence regime is heading towards this election, and they've taken tremendous steps towards consolidating fascism. And in particular, this movement for Black Lives Matter stands right now at a certain crossroads there, because while the Trump-Pence regime has been forced to back up since they unleashed the military against this movement and threatened to do that all over the country, they are not going to rest with this movement taking off. And people have to understand that the movement itself is facing a critical question with this, but also all of humanity and people in this country are facing a crossroads. This regime must be removed from power. And the organization Refuse Fascism last week, and which was Trump's birthday, had demonstrations around the country saying, what is the fitting way to celebrate Trump's birthday? So we're going to just show just a couple minutes of clips from this, and then I want to talk about what they're doing next. So let's roll that.
Here, where this is a protest by the group Refuse Fascism, and the aim of this protest is to kind of angle toward the idea of driving out President Trump and Vice President Pence.
So that was the protests on the 14th in Washington, the fitting way to celebrate Trump's birthday. And now Refuse Fascism has called for protests this coming weekend, particularly on the 20th, when Trump will be speaking in what is essentially a Klan campaign rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Just the outrage of him doing this after he's threatened to send out the military against the Black Lives Matter movement and has talked over and over again about law and order. It hasn't really put forth any real serious word of empathy or understanding of why this movement has grown up. So this weekend, the Refuse Fascism has called for a protest. We've just gotten their leaflet. The title is Into the Streets on Juneteenth weekend. No more police murder of black people. No fascist police state. No fascist military war on the people. Trump Pence out now. And it's calling for people to recognize that this is an urgent need and to take to the streets in whatever city you're in. And we're sending some people, we being Refuse Fascism, to Tulsa this weekend. If you're anywhere within 8 hours of Tulsa or you feel like getting on a plane, go there and join with Refuse Fascism this weekend. And so we wanted to announce that on this show. So that about wraps up episode 13. Last week, I announced that there would be a new podcast from Bob Avakian on our YouTube channel, The RevComs, but it wasn't there due to technical problems that we're still working out. But it will be there this coming week. And this podcast is titled Emancipate Humanity with Bob Avakian, a podcast produced by the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Every single word of this podcast, every argument he makes, every moment of sharp struggle with people over how they're thinking that system think, every deep exploration of strategy and theory, every bit of his wonderful humor, all the passion for people all over the world has one aim and one aim only, to contribute to the emancipation of humanity. So get ready and listen. All right, so that, again, wraps up the 13th episode of the RNL show. My name is Andy Z. We'll see you next week, Thursday, 5 p.m. Pacific time and 8 p.m. Eastern time, and you can figure out Mountain and Central time from there. So see you next time.